My name is Chris. I'm 49 years old. I've had chronic health problems for the last 17 years that have been bad enough to prevent me from generating an income. I have reason to believe that I have some sort of central nervous system infection, though exactly what type I'm not sure. But 3 months ago, I was able to acquire a Pulse Technologies PFG direct contact device through Jordan DeYoung, and I just want to let people know what I've experienced with that. First, let me say a little bit about what my problems have been. I earned my DC degree when I was in my late 20s, and I worked as a chiropractor for 7 years, had my own practice. And those 7 years should have been the best years of my life, but they were actually the worst, because during that time I lost my health. I lost my health after only 4 years in practice, and I hung on to the practice another 3 years, but it just dwindled down to nothing. When you don't have good energy, you cannot attract people into your office. In that 4th year in practice, I became profoundly depressed, not suicidal, but just had a lot of depression. And then a few months later after that, the next year in January, I got some sort of, seemed like a viral infection. My energy was really extra poor, but my body would never go through the inflammation process to overcome that infection and deal with it. But that after 5 or 6 weeks, that did finally resolve in a dramatic fashion. I got up to go to work that morning, and suddenly a severe vertigo hit me, and I mean really severe. I had to get down on the ground, put my head on the ground, because if I didn't, I was in danger of violently vomiting. I was not in good shape. Along with that vertigo, my right eye muscles that control the eyeball, they spasmed, and my right eye was looking in a totally different direction than what my left eye was, and it was an extremely disconcerting feeling. I was in that state for about 3 hours. The vertigo was so bad and the danger of throwing up was so bad, I couldn't even get my head up off the floor, couldn't get to a phone to call my assistant and have her cancel my patients for that morning. But it did resolve after about 3 hours, and after that the fatigue feeling from the viral infection was not there anymore. But then it wasn't that I was getting better, I was actually getting worse. I went through next several months with some intermittent nervous system problems. I had that problem with my eyes and the vertigo that I just described. I had less severe times of that, probably another 5 or 6 times through the next several months. And also had a couple of times, short, only 90 seconds, but in my right eye, it suddenly looked like somebody was holding construction paper, gray construction paper in front of it. And I could even see the grain of the paper of what it looked like, although there was no paper in front of my eye. It looked like somebody had just punched some holes, some jagged holes through that paper, and I could see the actual visual information behind it, but most of it was just this gray field of a grainy construction paper look. That happened twice. I also had some instances where I'd be walking along and my right foot would have some problem with foot drop, and it would drag on the ground because of weakness there. Or if I was carrying a fairly heavy book in my right hand, I might suddenly drop it. I just wasn't able to maintain the grip on it like usual. That happened several times. But then in September of that year, that's when the real bomb went off in my life. On a Saturday, all of a sudden, within just a few minutes, I had this huge flood of numbness come into my right side of my body. It was I would say about an 80% loss of sensation in the right half of my body. It was worst in the central part of my body, less out to my extremities. It was very uncomfortable, not painful, but just felt really strange. Also, when I would move, there was a strange buzzing sensation that would accompany it. The numbness was there all the time, but the buzzing sensation was evidently only associated with movement of my joints. And I went to bed that night really hoping it would be gone the next day, but it wasn't. It was still there. When it happened, I was very concerned about what was going on with me. I was wondering, am I experiencing a stroke or a transient ischemic attack? What's going on? My blood pressure was fine. Didn't know what was going on. So 2 weeks later, I made an appointment with a very good neurologist. I described to him the neurological symptoms I'd been experiencing, and he said, well, I'm pretty sure that you must have multiple sclerosis or some sort of demyelinating disease. We ended up doing a brain scan, and the brain scan was negative. There were no white patches of demyelinated areas showing up. So he said, well, good news, you don't have MS. What you do have some sort of viral infection in your brain. Those are very difficult to track down and diagnose positively, but he said that's what you must have going on. Not to worry. In 6 months, maybe 9 months, it'll all go away. It didn't feel to me at that time like it was going to go away, so I said, what if it doesn't? And he said, well, if in 3 months it's not gone, come back and see me, and we'll talk about it then. So in that 3 months, I had already thought for a little while that I had MS, because it took some time for the time he first told me that. It took about a month before I actually got the report on the MRI, and he said I didn't have MS. So I made changes in my diet, cutting out saturated fat according to, I believe it's Roy Swank, the Swank MS diet. And I had also had some indication I was protein deficient, so I began to add some measure of protein and began to take some free-form amino acids in my diet. And this had brought the numbness to where it was probably about half as bad as it had been when it first came on. But it wasn't giving any sign of going away. So I went back to see this neurologist. And he said, oh, well, he said, no problem. He said, it'll go away with it. It may take a year, may take a year and a half, but it'll go away. Well, turns out he was wrong. It never went away. This nervous system condition has been my constant companion ever since. I would really like to make it go away. Since it didn't go away as he promised it would, I thought that he was dead wrong. He must be wrong about the viral problem. But I've come to the conclusion that probably he was right on half of it. He's probably right that I have some sort of pathogenic microorganisms creating this nervous system condition that I have. He was just wrong about it resolving so nicely and so easily. Now, along with this loss of sensation in the right half of my body, which I think would be appropriate to call it hemiesthesia, I've also experienced a loss in my overall mental capacity, and especially my memory. I was blessed with a fairly quick mind. I was a valedictorian of my high school. I haven't lost all my mental capacity, but it has been adversely affected, no doubt about it. Along with those things, I've also experienced a lot of fatigue, particularly in the mornings. It'd be very appropriate to say that I have delayed sleep phase syndrome or disorder. My normal 24-hour circadian rhythm has been rather severely disrupted. Years ago, it was to where I couldn't hardly go to bed until 2 o'clock in the morning. And then it got to be maybe 3 to 3:30 in the morning before I could go to bed. And then it got to be 5:30. And 3 months ago when I purchased the PFG unit, it was to the point where I really could hardly ever go to bed before about 8 o'clock in the morning. Sometimes I could get to bed at 6:30, but that didn't feel normal for me. 8 o'clock was about the time I felt like I could go to bed and actually sleep. Our circadian rhythm is controlled largely by the production of cortisol. Cortisol produced by the adrenal glands is supposed to come up really nice and high when the sun comes up, and that wakes us up, gets our energy going, and then it gradually tapers out through the rest of the day, and by nighttime it should be getting low to where we say, boy, we're really sleepy, we've got to get in bed. The normal pattern of my cortisol levels have been disrupted for a very long time, and I can say that if everybody in the world had this condition, well, then the world would look extremely different. No one would get up before noon. Nobody would be to work before, say, 3 o'clock or maybe even 6 o'clock. No nation would ever go to war with any other nation because nobody would have the energy to do so. Anyway, suffice it to say that the health problems I have, they have had a crippling effect on me for a number of years. And this is in spite of the fact that on the outside, I look fine. I'm not in a wheelchair. I'm not on crutches. I smile. I'm nice and kind to people, and I speak like I have no health problems at all. But my energy production is way off from normal. Now, I've been very determined to recover my health and to gain my power back, and I've done quite a number of things to try to do that. Everything that I can think of to try. For quite a number of years, I focused very heavily on perfecting my diet, making sure that everything I was eating was good for me, it was healthy. For a long time I thought that if you just would find the right nutritional supplements along with a good diet, that you could just about cure anything. Well, I found out that that's not quite so. Now, Jordan in the past has had, while he was doing an interview, a caller named Richard has called in and said, look, the environment of the body is the most important. And Richard, if you're listening, I'll say I agree with you, that is so. And if your nutritional status is off, you can't maintain your health, and you're certainly not going to be able to regain your health. But I can tell you for sure that for myself, and I'm sure other people with difficult chronic health problems, good nutrition and even good nutritional supplements alone is not enough to regain your health. And I, for one, am really glad there's something else out there. I've tried a number of devices. Soon after I went out of business as a chiropractor, I invested $4,500 into a frequency generating device associated with another chiropractor that I'll leave nameless. I think it was a great device, but it didn't help me. In 2008, I didn't have any money by that time, but my father graciously purchased an OnDemand for me because I got real excited about the OnDemand, and I thought, wow, if I could just get that, I think I could get well. The OnDemand is a great device. It's unique on the planet, nothing else like it, but it's dependent on being able to sense the pulse, and I was no good at that. So, wonderful machine, but it didn't end up really doing much for me. Then I came across the Bob Beck devices. I tried those, and those are good. I didn't try the ozone generator, but I got a blood electrifier and I got the magnetic pulsar from Soda Instruments, and those were good. They're helpful. They just didn't create any lasting change for me. And then I had the opportunity to use a Curatron. Again, that's a wonderful machine, and while I was using it, I would feel more positive, I would feel some more energy, but the effect seemed to only last for hours. I can say for sure it didn't change what I had going on. So it was at that point that I found Jordan because of his YouTube channel and the fact that he owned an OnDemand. Began to look toward getting some of the Pulse Technologies devices. I would really like to get a plasma unit, and I plan on doing it when I'm able to get enough money together. But for the time being, the PFG unit is what I'm using, the direct contact unit. I started off with that and got the Zyto hand cradle from Jordan to test me remotely. When you get a new device and you've got health problems, you want to be cured overnight, and you're really disappointed when you're not. I didn't notice any change to start with. I also happen to have an Asira. Jordan has mentioned that before, that an Asira and a Zyto kind of do the same thing. He's got experience with both. In the Asira is programmed a whole lot of rife frequencies, and so I have used both Jordan's testing remotely with the Zyto and used my Asira to test myself to find the frequencies that would be appropriate for me. And even though it looked like in the beginning that nothing was happening, I started in the middle of December with the PFG unit. I treat myself every day, almost every single day. Then about the middle of February, some changes did start happening. I noticed that sometimes I would feel like I needed to sleep a whole lot extra. I was still sleeping all day. And then other days, I could hardly sleep at all through the day. And so this was different. By February 23rd, I believe, was the last day that I actually slept all day long. Go to bed at about 8 and sleep all day long. I was in bed for 10 hours that day. Because of sleeping so late, I wasn't able to go to bed at all the next morning, and I stayed up all the next day. And then I was really tired that evening. And it's kind of like the gears of my body just shuddered and shook, and they finally fell into place. And since that time, I have been able to go to bed at a proper time, wake up in the morning. My energy still fluctuates up and down, particularly in the mornings. But for me, this is a huge change, that this delayed sleep phase syndrome is finally seeming to be resolved. I've still got a good ways to go, but I finally have found something. After trying so many things and being disappointed so many times, I found something that's working for me. Jordan suggested that I talk a little bit about how I'm using the Asira to come up with frequencies to be used with the Pulse Technologies devices. Both the Zyto and the Asira are attempting to extract information from the human body field about what will be helpful to rebuild it wherever it may be disrupted. The thing about doing energetic testing is it's very tricky. If you do a test and it comes up with these answers and you say, wow, that's great, but then when you do a second scan, you get a whole different set of answers, and if you do a third scan, you get another whole different set of answers. So the question comes up, which one of these are right? Is the first test right? The second test right? Third test right? Are they only partly right, or are they all just a bunch of garbage? I've come to the conclusion that we don't have any instrument available that can be 100% accurate with its findings. If we had a device that had the mind of God programmed into it, then it would be 100% accurate, but we're not going to ever have that. So I believe we're always going to have some degree of inaccuracy in this testing, but it's also not a bunch of garbage. There's useful information in there. So I've decided that I would incorporate repeatability into my testing procedure. What I've ended up doing with my Asira, when I do the rife frequency scan, there are just a ton of frequencies programmed into this device, and it takes a full 12 minutes for the testing procedure. I will do one full test, maybe in the morning, and then in the afternoon I'll do another full test, or it might be on 2 successive days. Each test will generate about 150 frequencies on average. That's way too many to use. And these 2 tests will be quite different from each other. Thankfully, the Asira has a retest function built into it. So I will turn around, and hours after I've done the test, I will do 3 retests right in a row. 1, 2, 3. And those retests, after they scan through the 150, they'll come back and say, these are good. I end up with anywhere from 15 to 20 on average frequencies in these retests. And again, just like the first 2 full tests being quite different from each other, the retests will be also quite different from each other. But I'll do this set of 3 successive retests on the full original Rife frequency test. I'll do those maybe 2 or 3 times, so that at the end I've got 2 full Rife frequency tests, which have about 150 frequencies in each one, and I've got about 9 retests on both of those 2 full tests, which each of those have about 15 to 20 frequencies. Altogether, when you take all of those and put them all into one list, it generates over 500 frequencies. Generate a PDF report from my Asira. I'll take that, copy it into a Word document. I use find and replace to remove extra verbiage. All I've got left then is the frequencies and what condition they're supposedly associated with. I really don't care what condition it says it's listed with. I just want to know the frequencies that are happening the most frequently that the body says this will be good for me. So then I take all of those, that whole list, I open a spreadsheet like Excel, paste it into a single column, and then I will use the sort function, and it will sort them alphabetically and by number. I'll delete all the condition names out of there, and then I use the mode function, and it will tell me what's the most frequently occurring value in there. And so I'll make a record of it. Delete it out of the spreadsheet. The mode function tells me the next most frequently occurring one. And so I'll get about the top 10, maybe the top 12 or 15 occurring frequencies. And those are the frequencies that I use. The only problem is that in the Asira they're programmed so that they're very low frequencies. They're not up where they need to be for use in the Pulse Technologist devices. So I've got another spreadsheet. It's just multiplies times 2 enough times to get these frequencies from, say, 400 or 800 up into the 30,000 to 100,000 range. And then that ends up being the frequencies that I've used. So I think that by doing the repeatability and finding what frequencies are occurring the most often, those I believe have the most chance of doing some good for the body. And that's what I'm using. And I believe that what I've been doing has actually been working on some biofilms to help slowly break down biofilms that have probably developed in my brain area over the years. Don't have any proof of that, but I do know this, that my day-night cycle, I'm finally getting it back after many years of having it be very disruptive. One last comment I'll make is that while the Zyto and Asira are similar in what they're testing for, and no doubt they each have their own value, the Zyto has one huge advantage over the Asira. With my Asira, I cannot program into it any new frequencies, whereas the Zyto that Jordan has, he can build up an infinite number of new frequencies that he just generates with his P3 Pro unit, and any new frequencies that he wants to test people on, he just generates them, the Zyto records it, and then he's got it in his library to be able to scan people with. So in my mind, that's a very, very big advantage over the Asira, but both have their value.